We're recording this podcast in the year 2024, when more people than ever before in history will be voting in national elections. At least 64 countries, plus the European Union, which represents about 49% of the people in the world, are choosing their leaders. So, we thought, maybe we should talk about it and look at some useful vocabulary connected to elections. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, Reza?
I'm doing pretty well, considering the heat. We're recording this in July in Valencia, and you can imagine it gets pretty hot and humid here, but it's nice and comfortable in Craig's flat. He has the aircon on low. We don't want to damage the environment now, do we? We have it on the minimum setting, and it's comfortable in here, but I'm not looking forward to going out into the street after this podcast. Are you?
It's getting very hot here, isn't it? Yeah, it's that time of the year. Before we get started, a quick announcement. Google Podcasts has gone away now. So no more Google Podcasts. And we know that many of you have been listening on Google Podcasts. Now, if you're listening now, you've obviously found an alternative. But just to let you know that if you do have an Android phone, because maybe you're listening on our website, and if you're looking for a new app for your podcasts, we suggest the Pocket Casts app, which you can find at pocketcasts.com, or the Podcast Addict app, which is at podcastaddict.com. The links to those two free podcast apps are on the website at inglespodcast.com/526. So if you are looking for an app to listen to us and other podcasts that you like, then we'd suggest those two.
Craig, we got a voice message from Andres from Colombia.
Here he is.
Hi Reza, hi Craig. This is Andres from Colombia. I just was reading an article about interesting facts of Singapore, and I found out that in Singapore, the sale of chewing gum is forbidden since 1992, and that fact just blew my mind, to be honest, because it's pretty normal here to buy chewing gum in almost any place. So I thought maybe this could be an interesting topic for my favorite podcast. Of course, I'm talking about you guys and Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig. And I'd like to suggest that topic for a future episode, maybe controversial bans or prohibitions in other countries. We used to have one of them here in Bogota. It was that a few years ago, it was forbidden to ride a motorcycle with a passenger on the central roadway of the avenues in Bogota. And I know it sounds strange, but behind this, there was a reason. And it was that the assassinations of hitmen in the 80s and 90s that were made using motorcycles. So guys, that's my idea. I hope you are doing well. And thank you. Bye.
I think you must be psychic, Andres. I think there's some telepathy happening here because, curiously, we recorded an episode on strange and unusual laws, which fits very well with your idea. And we actually recorded it before we got your message. Let's pull back the curtain and tell you a little bit about how we produce the podcasts. As we've mentioned before, we don't always record the podcast week to week. In fact, very, very rarely. We record maybe 3 podcasts and then we release them. so that Reza doesn't have to keep coming to my flat to record every week. And we also have one or two that we keep for emergencies. So if we're really busy with work or we're sick or something happens, because let's face it, life happens sometimes and you can't always keep to your schedule, we keep one or two podcasts in reserve. And that is the podcast, one of those podcasts that we published on strange and unusual laws. So it's perfect timing, Andres. Go listen to that podcast, and thank you for letting us know about the law with motorcycles in your country and also the chewing gum in Singapore, which was very interesting. Reza, did you notice anything about the message that could be improved?
One little thing, which I've heard so often that it almost sounded right, but it isn't. You said, Andres, the sale is forbidden since, I can't remember exactly what year, since 20 years ago. But it's not is forbidden. It should be the sale has been forbidden. Present perfect, because if it started in the past and it's up to now, it has to be a present perfect. So we should say the sale has been forbidden for a long time, for example.
And there were some very nice expressions and collocations in your message, Andres. There's just one thing that stood out. I really liked the expression to blow my mind when you're surprised, very surprised about something, but I don't think you got the correct tense of blow. The past is blew. So it blew my mind when I heard about the law in Singapore. Blew, B-L-E-W. It really blew my mind when I discovered that fact.
Let's move to another continent. From South America, let's go to Europe. And we have a voice message from regular listener Walter from Belgium.
Hi Craig and Reza, it is me again, Walter from Belgium. Considering that next month there is the general EU election, please could you make another episode about election? How we call the box where we put our envelope when we are finished to choose our candidate, where how we call the room where we are inside when we want to choose our candidate for the election. Thank you and have a lovely weekend. Bye bye. See you next time.
Well, thank you very much, Walter, for your suggestion. Obviously, the European elections have already happened, but we still think your topic is very relevant, especially in 2024. As we said at the beginning of the episode, at least 64 countries holding elections this year. Now, we have spoken about politics before, haven't we, Reza?
We have. We don't like to speak about politics too much, but purely to help your English. Who does? Who does? Not many people. But we, for the good of your English, spoke about politics and government way back in episode 89. Ooh, that was a few years ago.
Long time.
Ooh. So if you go back to that episode, we got a link in the show notes. So it's inglespodcast.com/ and then the number of the episode, 89. You'll find that one. And another one, more recently, but still a few years ago, about Brexit, which obviously has already happened as well. So that was episode 342.
Which we recorded under protest, if you remember. We really didn't want to talk about it, but you wanted us to, so we did. I think we've said everything that needs to be said about Brexit, but election fever is gripping many countries around the world. And as we choose our best representatives to lead us into the future, my God, it's depressing. Do you usually vote?
Sometimes, not all the time. I have voted, but I don't always. What about you?
Hardly ever. I think I voted once. I don't like to vote for politicians. I think it encourages them.
Yeah. I see your point.
And actually, I don't think as residents in Spain, not citizens, we can't vote in national elections, can we? Only local elections here.
That's right. We could never vote in national elections, but whenever the United Kingdom was in the EU, now it isn't because of Brexit, we could vote, I think, for the
European elections?
European elections, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But for a Spanish candidate, but not anymore because, of course, Brexit has happened.
Yeah. So let's look at some vocabulary that will help you if you need to discuss politics in English. Now, politicians are elected to office, or you could say they are voted into office. So, voted into office or elected to office.
Another very important expression talking about elections is to hold or to have an election. So we're talking about collocations here. The verb hold or have collocates with election. You hold or you have an election.
And if you want to be Prime Minister of your country or President, then you need to stand for office. That's a phrasal verb, to stand for something. Stand for is an interesting phrasal verb because if you stand for office, then you are a representative who wants to be the leader, the Prime Minister, the President, for example. But if you say, I won't stand for it, then you won't accept it or you won't suffer it easily. So you don't accept something. I won't stand for this nonsense, for example. But the same phrasal verb can be used in the sense of being a representative or a candidate for the presidency, which is the title of being president.
Rather confusingly, if you don't want to stand for office, you could always run for office. So you don't have to keep still. You could either stand or run.
But you don't sit for office, do you?
You don't sit, no.
But there is a sitting president.
Oh, that's true. A sitting president, the one who's the president at the moment, although election's going to happen soon, right?
Yeah.
You can also say run for office or run for president.
And if you want a candidate, a politician to be elected, then you need to vote for them. V-O-T-E, to vote. And the collocation with the noun vote is to cast a vote. So you can use the verb to vote, or you can use the noun vote and then the verb to cast. Cast has different collocations. You can cast when you go fishing. That means to throw the hook into the river is casting. And you can also cast a shadow. So there are some strong collocations with cast, but here with politics, you cast a vote.
Now, there are different types of elections. We've already mentioned the fact that there are national elections in Spain. There are also European elections for the European Parliament. Another way of saying national elections, in other words, for the whole nation, that's why we say national. You can also say general election or general elections. You hear 50-50 mixture, sometimes as singular, sometimes as plural, but it actually means the same thing. So you could say there's going to be a general election or there's going to be general elections. You hear both forms, both singular and plural. Also, there can be regional elections. So in Spain, that would mean voting for the people, the politicians who are going to represent you. Well, in the case of Valencia, that would be the Generalitat Valenciana. In Catalonia, that would be the Generalitat Catalana, or the government of Madrid, or the government of the Basque Country, etc. Every region has its own government. I guess also regional elections in the United Kingdom context would be for the Scottish Parliament, or the Welsh Parliament, or the Northern Irish Parliament. Craig, I wonder why England doesn't have its own parliament.
It does, doesn't it?
No.
It's the parliament.
Okay, but that's for the whole UK.
Oh,
but then
right.
Scotland has its own parliament. Wales and Northern Ireland, they have their own regional governments. England doesn't have a regional government. Isn't that strange? Why don't they get one?
Probably because it's the centre of government in the UK, so they kind of consider it the big one.
Right.
And all the others are smaller regional governments. So maybe that's the reason, because London's London, isn't it? It's big.
Yeah.
It's the big guy in the room.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely, though, in the United Kingdom, in all parts, including England, there are also local elections. When we say local elections, in the case of the United Kingdom, we're talking about councils, Council, council elections.
Local councils.
Local councils, yeah. In Spain, that would be for ayuntamientos, yeah. So in the United Kingdom, we got councils, and in Spain, they got ayuntamientos. And in other countries, you'll have slightly different divisions. So the local elections is a smaller scale than the regional elections. It's a subdivision of the region.
We've had the word vote just now. So if you vote for a candidate, a politician in an election, the candidate, the politician who gets the most votes is elected to the seat or to the position. And the people in the country who are voting or electing them, they are called the electorate. You can see that word elect inside that noun, the electorate. So the electorate, all the people in the country or in the area, in the case of local elections, who are entitled to vote in an election. For example, the electorate will decide the next president.
Another very important word related to elections is the word ballot. B-A-L-L-O-T, ballot. And it's the process of voting in writing, yeah, so officially down in black and white. And typically, though not always, but ideally, it should be secret.
Depends on the country, doesn't it?
It depends on the country. In some countries, they know who you voted for, but they're not the most democratic countries in the world, are they? But in theory, it should be secret, and you cast a ballot or a ballot paper. You can say a ballot to refer to the process, or you can also use it to refer to the actual piece of paper where you write. So you cast a ballot or you cast a ballot paper. For example, voters cast their ballots in the election.
And you've added an expression here, Reza, that I'm not too sure what it is. To spoil a ballot. I know the meaning of to spoil a drawing or to spoil food you're preparing, which makes it not good. But to spoil a ballot when you're writing or doing something so that it doesn't count, it's not approved, it's not good. Does that mean that you're taking a pen and you're just scribbling or writing something on it?
There's different things you can do. I read up on this a bit. In other words, I did my research, and you can what you can do is, for example, imagine you have to tick one box and there's a choice of 20, a list, for example. If you tick every single one, or you tick 3, then it's useless. If you tick more than one, usually, then they don't know who you voted for because you were only supposed to tick 1.
So people do that, they make a mistake, so they don't do it properly?
Sometimes. Some spoiled ballots are mistakes, and some are done on purpose.
Why would people do it on purpose? What's the benefit?
As a sign of protest.
Ah.
And you might think, isn't it easier just not to vote?
Yeah, just don't vote.
No, it's not the same thing. I used to think this myself, but if you don't vote, nobody knows that you're unhappy. But if you spoil a ballot paper, it's a way of the government at the moment knowing, okay, it could be that there are X number of very silly people who don't know how to vote, or it could be that they're trying to take prestige or importance away from the elections. But the thing is about spoiled ballot papers, which are done on purpose, it has to be announced in advance. So, for example, political parties who are unhappy with the system in the country say, go out and spoil your ballot paper because we think this election is a farce. It's undemocratic. We don't agree with it. It's fixed. So our voters don't do anything except spoil your ballot paper. And if suddenly then in that country, from being 10 spoiled ballot papers, now there's 200,000, you could draw a conclusion.
Yeah, so it's a protest, let's say, against the election.
So if you spoil your ballot paper, you've done something to make it null or void. And you'll often hear that when talking about elections, that a vote is null and or void. Quite often they go together, null and void.
For emphasis.
Yeah, null and void. That means you've done something which makes this process or this piece of paper in this case useless. Yeah, it doesn't count. So if you spoil a ballot paper, the ballot paper is null and void, so it doesn't count for any political party.
Now, where do you put your ballot paper? Well, there's a special box usually, a physical box. It's called the ballot box. And that's where the ballot papers are placed or put by each voter.
The next word is constituency. And that means a body, a group of voters in a specified area who elect a representative to a legislative body. There are different types of legislative body. We've already said there are council elections, so you would be voting for the council. That would be the legislative body. There could be regional elections, so the legislative body that you're voting for then would be, for example, the Generalitat Valenciana, let's say, etc. So the constituency is a designated area for the legislative body, which then will have a representative who's the person who gets the most votes. Craig, whenever you lived in the UK, or the last place that you lived in the UK, do you remember what your constituency was called for the general elections?
No, I don't, because I'd been traveling around. So whenever I went back to the UK, it was just to visit the family. So I really didn't pay attention to that kind of thing. And because I was moving around and traveling outside of the UK, I didn't pay much attention to the elections. I always knew what was going on, more or less, but I didn't get involved in the constituency and think, who am I going to vote for? No idea. What about you? Did you vote for, is there a Belfast constituency?
There's several. There's Belfast North, Belfast South, I think. West and East as well, but I was none of them. I was just outside Belfast, the constituency Lagan Valley.
Right.
So believe it or not, there is an MP there in Westminster representing Lagan Valley. You've probably never heard of it.
Nope.
People only really know about their own constituencies. There are many, many obscure names of constituencies for the 500 and something MPs, which you'll find in Westminster.
Actually, now you mention it, come to think of it, I think my constituency was North Ilford, because I grew up in Ilford in Essex. So there was a North Ilford and I think a South Ilford. That would have been it, I think, but I'm not too sure.
Another word you need to know to talk about elections is incumbent. The incumbent is the person who's the current holder of a political office. So it's used just before the elections happen to describe the person who does have the job at the minute, but they may or may not keep the job after the elections. That person is the incumbent.
Now, where do you go when you want to vote in an election? There's a special place and it's usually not permanent. It tends to be temporary and it's called a polling station, Polling, like a police station, but with no police, a polling station. And it's a place where you go as a voter to cast your vote in an election. And these polling stations tend to be places like schools and sports centres, big places where they can hold a local election. And it tends to be on a Sunday because obviously schools are closed and most people are not working, so then they can go and vote on a Sunday. Now, the same word polling can also be used together with booth, B-O-O-T-H. A booth is a very, very small area for a reason, like a telephone will be, or used to be, in a telephone booth. Or if you want to record a podcast, you might have a recording booth, which is a very, very small box that you record in. And in a similar way, a polling booth is a compartment, a very small space, where one voter at a time stands to mark their ballot paper and vote. A polling booth.
For example, after coming out of the polling booth with her ballot paper ready, she placed it in the ballot box. So the booth is simply to guard your privacy so no one knows who you're voting for.
In some countries.
In some countries, yeah.
Remember, you can see all of these words and example sentences in our show notes. Go to inglespodcast.com/526 to see the notes for this episode. Now, how many people vote in an election? Well, the number of people who actually vote, who cast their ballot, that's called the turnout. Compound noun, turn and out. The turnout, the number of people who vote in an election. For example, voter turnout was higher than expected. And you can also use that word. It's not particularly connected to politics. You can say, for example, there was a really good turnout at my birthday party. Lots of people came. Or there was a good turnout at the meeting.
Craig, what do you think the turnout will be like for the British national election, the UK national election, which I believe is tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken?
It is. At the time of recording this podcast, we're in July 2024. There's the UK general election tomorrow. It's called a snap election because it's been called very, very quickly, similar to the one in France. So I think more people will be voting than normal. That's my opinion. The turnout will be larger than normal. Do you agree?
Yes, I have a feeling there's going to be a high turnout. Yep.
But will there be a landslide victory for the Labour Party?
What do you mean by that? Landslide victory.
An overwhelming majority of votes for one particular party or one particular candidate. I'm not using party in the sense that I did before with a good turnout at my birthday party. I'm using party in the sense of a political party. A political group is called a party in English. So if there is a landslide, there's a huge majority of people who vote in a particular way. For example, the candidate won by a landslide, or you can say there was a landslide victory.
I don't think there will be a landslide victory for the Labour Party. Virtually everyone is predicting that the Labour Party will beat the Conservative Party in the general election tomorrow in the UK. And I believe that will happen as well. But I don't believe it's going to be a landslide. I think it's going to be close. I don't think they'll have such a majority. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right, because in the UK, they tend to have a two-party system, which means that most of the people there, one side or the other side, there are two main parties, and the government tends to swing or change between one and the other. It's a two-party system.
In other words, in the UK, they don't have proportional representation. You may vote for a party along with thousands of other people who get no representation whatsoever in the parliament because they didn't win a single seat. A seat, like what I'm sitting on right now, can also be a synonym for the constituency. The seat is the constituency. So in the United Kingdom, you have to get the highest number of votes in your constituency, your seat, to win it. And all the other people get nothing who participated. There's only one winner, the one with the most votes. They have won the seat, and the seat is for that political party, even if they won, let's say, though it's not going to happen, by one vote. Imagine they got 20,000 votes, and the party which came second got 19,999. What did the second party get for their troubles? Nothing. Absolutely zero. No representation because of one person. That's the system in the UK. First past the post. So it has created a two-party system that either Labour or Conservatives, the big two parties, they tend to win. And other parties which tend to come second or third always in the number of voters, they get nothing because they never get enough votes to win a constituency. So even though lots of people vote for them, they never get a seat in the parliament. That's why they call it a seat. They don't get to sit in Westminster because they never win a constituency. What are your thoughts on that? Do you like the first past the post system, winner takes all, or do you prefer proportional representation?
The problem I see with proportional representation is that you tend to have to strike deals or make agreements with the smaller parties in order to get a majority in the government. So you have to give a lot of favors, in my opinion, too many favors to parties that really don't have a large percentage of the vote. So that's not fair. Now, it seems fair. Well, if there are 100,000 people, then let's do it proportionally. But then when it comes to forming a government, that's where the favors come in. We will join you if you blah, blah, blah. Although I still think that the system in the UK is better than the American system, where you would win one state, then that would decide the election, which is crazy. And it's not proportional at all to the number of people living in the country or living in the state. One very small state with a small population can decide the whole election.
Yeah, for me, the American system, as I understand it, is the least democratic of all. So if you don't win the state, then none of the voters who voted for the other party in the state get any representation whatsoever. We could be talking about 5, 10, 15 million people. Yeah. And they get no representation because they were second in that state. That's truly, truly extreme, I find.
And there are usually, 4, 5, maybe 6 states that decide the election, because some states are clearly left of center, some states are clearly right of center, and then there are those states in the middle that decide what happens, who gets elected. And those states are called the swing states because they swing from one side to the other and they decide who's going to be president. Now, we've spoken a little about parties. We've mentioned the Labour Party in the UK. They tend to be left of centre. And the Conservatives, they tend to be right of centre. In US politics, you've got the Republicans on the right and the Democrats on the left. What I find interesting is the branding. Have you noticed that? The Labour Party in the UK tends to be red, although the Conservatives in America, the Republicans, tend to be red as well. And the Democrats are blue in America, and the Conservatives are blue. So it's kind of the opposite from one to the other.
Yeah. It's the Americans who are the anomaly, because Britain follows the symbolism of most countries around the world. That
red closer to communism.
Yeah, kind of left
socialism,
isn't it? Yeah, generally speaking. Yeah. But because in America virtually nobody's vaguely interested in socialism, they just ignore the fact, I think.
Yeah. So when a politician is elected, you have a prime minister or you have a president, the opposition, the people opposing who lost, they tend to concede defeat. Usually, in some elections, as we've seen recently in the US, it doesn't always happen that defeat is conceded. But when the winner is announced, then it's usually good practice, let's say, to concede defeat.
So hopefully the loser concedes defeat, but that might not happen, as Craig says. Then they announce the winner, and then the winner is inaugurated as the new president, for example, or prime minister, and they will give their acceptance speech. The speech when they say, I accept the role of prime minister because everyone has voted for me. Thank you very much. But obviously in a much prettier and more formal way than that.
There are some abbreviations you might come across or find when you're looking at politics vocabulary. Prime Minister is often abbreviated to PM. MP, if you see that word, that's Member of Parliament. And there are other words connected with positions, aren't there, Reza?
Yes, you could be the leader of a party. So, for example, the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the Republicans, the leader of the Democrats. There are other types, particularly in Europe, where we tend to have a bit more of a selection. There are Democrats, there are socialists. You won't find many of them in America. Social Democrats. You could argue that perhaps the Labour Party are social democrats. The PSOE in Spain, maybe something like that. Christian Democrats. They tend to be a little bit to the right. So you might say that the PP, the Partido Popular in Spain, are Christian Democrats. Christian Democrats often win the elections in Germany. They actually call themselves the Christian Democrats. That's their name in Germany. It doesn't mean that they're very, very religious. It just means that they kind of follow the traditional kind of vaguely Christian ideas, but not super religious. Craig mentioned communists. There's also liberals, kind of you're quite permissive when it comes to rules. You don't want the government to impose too many rules. Can you think of any other denominations, Craig?
Not denominations, but we spoke about Labour being more to the left of politics. You could call them left wing. That's very common. And the Conservatives in the UK being more right of centre, you could call them right wing. Now, if you go further to the left, then you are getting to socialism and communism. And if you go further to the right, extreme right, we could say, then you're getting to fascism. And what's interesting in Europe, and I don't know if you've noticed, Reza, but there's been a swing to the right. Do you remember that word swing, when the political mood or the way people vote tends to go in one direction? That's the swing. If you look at countries like Hungary, Italy, Finland, Croatia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they all have right-wing governments.
And you forgot France.
Well, they don't have a right-wing government at the moment. I was going to say, if you look at France, Germany and the Netherlands, they are also going in that direction. Have you noticed that?
Oh, I certainly have. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the dominant parties, I believe now in Europe, are going to be what I would call the hard right. Some people say that's a synonym for extreme right, but technically speaking, I would disagree with that. For example, the Nazi Party of Germany were definitely extreme right. There's no doubt about it.
But weren't they called the National Socialists?
They were indeed, yeah. Yeah, they can call themselves what they like, but they were definitely...
They can call themselves the Green Party if they want to.
But they were definitely, no one would disagree there, would they, that they were extreme right-wing. But what have we got in Europe now? We've got parties which are very, very proudly to the right. They're not apologetic at all. And they admit, yeah, we want to be hard on immigrants and foreigners. We don't want to give them an easy time in our country. But they themselves don't like to be called extreme right. The word extreme doesn't sound good, does it?
No.
So I think they tend to accept more the term hard right, meaning, yeah, we're right wing and we're not ashamed of it. Don't call us extreme, but yeah, we're right wing. Let's not beat around the bush. Let's not deny it. So for me, the hard right is now the dominant force in European politics. Certainly the right wing, and I would go so far as to say the hard right. I mean, the most voted party in Germany, beg your pardon, the most voted party in France, Marine Le Pen's. We're talking about the second biggest country in Europe. And I don't know, was the hard right party Alternative für Deutschland, were they the most voted in Germany as well? I think they were, or the second most voted.
I can't remember. They may have been. I honestly don't know.
I feel a bit sorry for a lot of people. I mean this with complete sarcasm, by the way. I feel very sorry for a lot of people who were on the extreme right and anti-immigrant, etc., who voted for Brexit to get out of Europe, which they thought, was, full of too many foreigners coming over. If only you'd stayed in Europe. It's now full of extreme right-wing politicians. You've blown your chance there. France, Germany, they're all extreme. They're far more right-wing than any British government. If only you'd hung in there, guys, you would have got to hang out with lots of very right-wing politicians.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
Let's just mention a few more miscellaneous terms. That's a mixture that are useful to talk about elections. You can make or launch an election campaign. So before the elections happens, you start promoting your party. People who give money to political parties are donors. They donate money. Of course, politicians like to speak in public. They give speeches. They also hold rallies. So a rally is when a large group of people come to support a political group. So they hold rallies. and they travel all over the country. So they go on a campaign tour. And very often they'll have campaign slogans. Yeah, a little phrase with a couple of words that they want you to remember that they'll repeat time and time again.
That's an important word, isn't it? Campaign. You have a political campaign in the same way that you have an advertising campaign. Reza, do you think anyone should be banned from voting?
Yes, I do, actually. People who've committed certain crimes.
Prisoners.
But not only that, when they get out of prison too, forever. I think it should be a lifetime ban. For serious crime, I think people should lose their right to vote. What about you?
I think Manchester United supporters.
I'd agree with that.
People who put pineapple on pizza.
Yeah.
They should be forbidden for life from ever voting in a political election. But what do you think? What's the politics like in your country at the moment? Why don't you send us a voice message? Tell us what you think and practice some of the vocabulary. There was a lot of political vocabulary in this episode. Let us know what you think and you can use it. You can contact us by voice message, which is our preferred method of communication, by going to speakpipe.com. I'll spell that for you, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. There's also a link in the show notes. How can people reach us by email, Reza?
If you prefer to write, you could get Craig at his address, craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're a Spanish speaker, and we know many of you are, and you want to study for free, why don't you visit the Mansion Ingles website at mansioningles.com. And if you'd like to buy something, you can visit the shop where you'll find some paid ebooks and audios for self-study. Check out the online store at store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to say a big thank you to our donors, or call them supporters if you like, on the Patreon scheme. That's Patreon. And what those people do is donate $1.50, that's the minimum per month, to the podcast. And as a way of saying thank you, they get instant access to the audio transcriptions of all the episodes. We'd like to say thank you to every single one of you, but we can't say everyone's name because we simply don't have time. So, Craig, shall we do what we always do and read out the list of the most recent sponsors?
Why not? Our most recent supporters are Carlos Delgado, Maria, Givilni, Frederica Boza, Cynthia Cepeda Cardenas, Israel Pinilla, Maria Eva Serral Carrasco, Anonymous, and Carlos. And apologies if I've mispronounced any of your names. What's next week?
Next week, we've got different means of transport, from bicycles to high-speed trains.
We hope you'll join us for that. Thank you so much for listening this week. Have a wonderful week. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, why not tell a friend so that more people can listen? And the music today is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.